Daniel, the 6th chapter, beginning with verse 3. Reading from the New Living Translation of the Scriptures, the word of the Lord is as follows. Daniel soon proved himself more capable than all the other administrators and high officers. Because of Daniel's great ability, the king made plans to place him over the entire empire. Then the other administrators and high officers began searching for some fault in the way Daniel was handling government affairs, but they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. So they concluded, our only chance of finding grounds for accusing Daniel will be in connection with the rules of his religion. So the administrators and high officers went to the king and said, "Long live King Darius. We are all in agreement, we administrators, officials, high officers, advisors, and governors, that the king should make a law that will be strictly enforced. Give orders that for the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone, divine or human, except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into the den of lions. And now, your majesty, issue and sign this law so that it cannot be changed, an official law of the Medes and Persians that cannot be revoked." So King Darius signed the law. But when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home and knelt down as usual in his upstairs room with its windows open toward Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God. Then the officials went together to Daniel's house and found him praying and asking for God's help. So they went straight to the king and reminded him about his law. "Did you not sign a law that for the next 30 days any person who prays to anyone, divine or human, except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into the den of lions?" "Yes," the king replied. "That decision stands. It is an official law of the Medes and Persians that cannot be revoked." Then they told the king, "That man Daniel, one of the captives from Judah, is ignoring you and your law. He still prays to his God 3 times a day." Thus far, the word of the Lord. You may be seated. But when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home and knelt down as usual in his upstairs room with his windows open toward Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God. Then the officials went together to Daniel's house and found him praying and asking for God's help. Then they told the king, "That man, Daniel, one of the captives from Judah, is ignoring you and your law. He still prays to his God 3 times a day." I want to preach today from the subject, bold prayer. Bold prayer. We return to our assertion that we began, that our contemporary moment presents the need for boldness. The time in which we live is a time that is calling for we as people of God, in general, African American believers in particular, to show up to difficult places, to speak out against difficult issues, to advocate for a transformative agenda, to be able to wait for the change that we desire. We further discovered that the external threat of bullies, be they global, national, or local, requires an internal boldness to be able to show up, stand up, and speak out. That for the believer, such boldness of action comes from a boldness of faith. A bold faith begins by recognizing the place and person of our empowerment. The place is the house of God, and the person is God himself. It is demonstrated by acknowledging the truth of the challenge. Boldness is not denying that there is a challenge. Boldness is looking at the challenge, being honest about the challenge, and rising up to the challenge. It comes from asserting the sovereign relevance of God for the challenge. And we learned also that it is a maximized faith that believes that it is God alone who does things, so that people can know that he is God all by himself. And then lastly, we learned that a bold faith awaits God's response to the challenge, and God will always respond with a word backed by action. Now, this faith to which we are called has a primary manifestation. And one of those primary manifestations of bold faith is a bold prayer. Let the church say bold prayer. The time in which we live is one where there is pressure to be general in terms of to whom you are praying, and there is pressure to relinquish your posture of prayer. There is an increase in intensity in terms of causing or trying to get you not to be specific into whom you're praying and to relinquish the posture for your praying. But if we are to be the people for which these times call and to demonstrate the boldness that resists the enmity of our age, we must be bold in prayer. The text before us is a familiar one. It is one that presents to us a mature Daniel who has become quite successful in life. And his success is highlighted or magnified by the contextual background of its occurrence. Daniel experiences success while living as an exile in a culture of disbelief. As a young person, his was the heart-wrenching experience of the Babylonian invasion of Jerusalem and Judah, the tearing down of Jerusalem's walls, and the very destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. He and his homeboys and his family, they have been transported from their home and taken into a foreign land. And he has endured and even transcended attempts to erase his cultural and religious heritage as a young man by remaining true to the God of his fathers. He did this not once, but he did it multiple times. And as a result, he experienced favor with God. And through the favor of God, favor with the very king who captured him and his people. Throughout his life, he was the picture of consistency in the things of God under several different administrations, starting with Nebuchadnezzar and then with Belshazzar. Daniel was faithful and effective in his service and witness. And now at the point of our text, Daniel is no longer a young man, but he is a much older man now. And he is still serving consistently and faithfully in the midst of a people who don't believe in his God. He is now serving not under Babylonian rule, but he is now serving under Mede and Persian rule. He now is serving under another set of people who believe differently from him, but they have enough sense to respect the favor that is on his life. The favor of God is upon him, and they recognize the favor of God upon him and the benefit that that favor brings to them. Please understand this. The world may never accept the God that you serve, but the world will always recognize the favor of that God upon your life. and want the benefit of that favor for you and for itself. And so the favor of God is seen upon him, even though they don't worship the God whose favor is upon him, but they want to enjoy the benefits that that favor brings, and that brings him elevation again. Darius, king of the Medes, makes Daniel his prime minister. Now I need for you to understand, imagine, if you will, a vanquished person, a person who is a part of a captive people, being elevated to rule and authority over the whole kingdom of his captors. How likely is that to be? But when the favor of God is upon your life, God can make the unlikely every day. And so Daniel is elevated to prime minister over those who have captured his people. The whole kingdom of Mede and Persia is subject to Daniel. Now this evokes the ire of Daniel's enemies. His elevated position creates an even higher level of exposure to attack. You see, friends, the higher you go and the broader you go, the greater visibility that you have, the greater the likelihood is that you will have people who desire to attack you. Be careful when you pray for increase, because you just might not like what increase brings to you. Increase brings increased scrutiny and increased animosity, increased jealousy, increased enmity. And that's what happens with Daniel. The higher he goes, the more enemies he gets. And the extent of his enemies' determination to harm him causes them to look, first of all, how can we get him in terms of his work life? But they find that Daniel is faithful, he's consistent, and he's effective. He shows up to work on time, doesn't steal any pens, right? Right? Ain't nothing in his browser history that they can attack. So they can't get him in terms of his work, because he's faithful, he's consistent, he's effective, and he has integrity. And so they come to the conclusion the only way that we're going to get him is on the rules of his religion. That's how we're going to get him. We can't get him in terms of his work life. There's nothing in terms of his personal life that we can put on Twitter or Facebook. The only way that we're going to get him is with reference to his God. And in particular, they would attack the place of prayer in Daniel's life. And so therefore they go to this King Darius, and the first thing that they do is they flatter the king. Perhaps the king is like some other leaders in our contemporary time who likes when people say good things about them. Long live the king. You are the man, and you are so much the man that we believe that there should be a 30-day moratorium on people praying to anybody but you. Your name should be the name that they call upon for 30 days. And if anybody calls on any other name other than the name of Darius, they should be thrown into the lion's den. That sounds good to Darius at first, and Darius agrees. Look at this now. Daniel's enemies seek to intimidate Daniel at the very source of his power, praying to his God. The belief is that the threat of death by a den of lions would be enough to get people to forsake praying to their God. And that would be their way to eliminate Daniel one way or another. Because if Daniel stops praying to his God, then Daniel's relationship with God has been compromised. And Daniel isn't everything that everybody claims. If Daniel maintains his integrity with God and keeps praying to God, then Daniel will be subject to death by a lion's den. Either way, they win. Darius issues the edict. He seals it. It's signed with his name. It says, so King Darius signed the law. But when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home, knelt down as usual in his upstairs room with his windows open towards Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God. Then the officials went together to Daniel's house and found him praying and asking God for help. Do you see this? In the midst of the threat being issued, Daniel goes home, proceeds to his prayer room upstairs as usual, kneels down towards Jerusalem, and prays with the windows open 3 times a day, as was his usual custom. At risk of losing life and limb, Daniel boldly and openly prays to God as was his custom. He does not change the rhythm of his prayer. He does not change the frequency of his prayer. He prays 3 times a day as usual. Not once, not twice, but 3 times as usual. He does not pray with the windows shut. He prays with the window open. He does not alter the time. He does not alter the environment. He does not alter the God to whom he prays. He calls on the Lord. He engages in bold prayer. We are indeed in a time when boldness in prayer is essential. A time where certain segments of society would seek to limit how you pray and to whom you pray. We need boldness in prayer. A time where the challenges to our existence as a people of faith in Jesus Christ are more open and varied. We need boldness in prayer. And you may ask, well, what does it mean to be bold in prayer? Glad you asked. You're a smart crowd, always asking the right questions. Bold prayer defies prescribed boundaries. Bold prayer defies prescribed boundaries. Look at it now. Darius' edict places a limit on the time and direction of prayer. For 30 days, people could pray only within certain boundaries. For 30 days. And one might say, well, it's only 30 days. 30 days goes by like that. 30 days. They could pray, but their prayers could only be to Darius. Daniel, upon hearing that the edict was issued, goes to his praying ground with the windows open and prays to God. He openly defies the boundaries set by Darius. Regardless of what Darius has said, he would openly call on the Lord his God. With circumstances saying that this was not the time to call on the Lord, Daniel openly and consistently calls on the Lord. Now, it's important for us to make the distinction. Daniel does this at home. All right? Now, Daniel is prime minister of Mede and Persia. He goes to his house and opens his window and prays. Because he understands, I need to do this where I know I meet God. He does it at home. He's not in his prime minister's chair. He is at his place where he knows that he meets God consistently. And he does not change that. He openly and consistently calls on the Lord. Bold prayer is prayer that defies prescribed boundaries. Bold prayer defies any limitation in calling on the name of the Lord. It rejects any moratorium against lifting your concerns before God. Boldness in prayer is hearing about the boundary and limitation and still going before God. It's praying with the attitude that there is no time span that can keep you from praying to God, no limitation that can hinder you from calling on his name, no circumstance too dire that you can't go to God, no threat too severe that you can't or will not open up your mouth and call on the name of the Lord. Daniel's prayers say that regardless of what Darius says, I'm talking to God. Bold prayer is prayer with the attitude that says, regardless of what's been said, I'm talking to God. Regardless of what they say, I'm talking to God. Regardless of what the experts say, regardless of what the situation says, regardless of what the diagnosis is, I'm talking to God. I'm taking this to the Lord in prayer. I wonder, am I talking to anybody in here who has had to have that type of boldness when you were told one thing and you say, well, that's what you say, but I'm going to take this to God and see what God has to say about it. I know what you think, but I'm going to go to God and take this to him, because God's thoughts are not my thoughts and God's ways are not my ways. As higher as the heavens are above the earth, so much higher are God's thoughts than mine and God's ways than mine. And I just said God is the great I am, which means God can do what he wants to, when he wants to, how he wants to, where he wants to, with whom he wants to. I'm going to take this to God. Bold prayer defies prescribed boundaries. But then there's something else about bold prayer. Bold prayer asserts primary allegiance. Look at it again. With windows open and his face towards Jerusalem, Daniel gives thanks to God, and Daniel asks God for help. Now, Darius's edict ordered allegiance only to Darius. You call on nobody's name but Darius's name. But Daniel, having heard the edict, goes to his prayer room with windows open, and he prays prayers of thanksgiving and supplication to God. Because while Darius is king and Daniel is Darius's prime minister, who is charged with the task of implementing Darius's program throughout the whole kingdom, Daniel is heard thanking God and requesting help from God. Now you got to understand this. As prime minister, Daniel's job is to implement Darius's program, thereby requiring an allegiance to Darius. Daniel is heard thanking God and requesting help from God. As such, Daniel declares that his primary allegiance is to God and not to Darius. Daniel does not try to appease Darius by praying with the windows closed. He prays with the windows open, demonstrating his primary allegiance is to God. God was worth his allegiance for two reasons: God's past goodness and God's present availability. It's right there. Daniel thanks and praises God. That word in the English that's translated thanks, that word is yada. And yada is the lifting up of the hands in worship to God. It is the expression of thanks and praise to God. Daniel says, now you got to catch this now. Not only are the windows open, but Daniel's hands are not folded. They're not held behind his back. They're not held down. but his hands are outstretched in gratitude and praise unto his God. It's not just what Daniel is saying, but it's also what Daniel is doing that is bold in his prayers. He is expressing gratitude for God's past goodness. And in the midst of current threat, Daniel is not caught up with the threat. He's caught up with thinking about what God has done for him, how God has kept him, how God has watched over him, how God has elevated him above his enemies, because this isn't the first time Daniel has faced threats, and God has been with him every time. And therefore, the current threat does not eliminate his being thankful for who God is and for what God has done. I just want somebody to understand that boldness in prayer will always assert a primary allegiance to God out of the remembrance of God's past goodness to you. The recognition of God's goodness is a reason to assert allegiance to God, because nobody has been better to you than God. Nobody has done more for you than God. Nobody has been with you longer than God. Nobody has forgiven you more than God. Nobody has given you more than God. And because of that, nobody deserves greater allegiance than God. You ought to be able to give thanks to God openly as an expression of your allegiance to God. You recognize that God is the source of every good and perfect gift. God is the reason for your survival. He's the reason for your success. He's the reason for your elevation. God is the reason. And because God is the reason for all of that, God is the one to whom you pray. God is the one whom you thank. God is the one whom you applaud. God is the one whom you celebrate. God is the one whom you extol. You magnify nobody but God. You bless nobody but God. You lift your hands to nobody but God. You will raise your voice to nobody but God. Because God is the reason why you got sense in your mind and strength in your body. God is the reason why you got sanity. God is the reason. Daniel says, I got to assert my primary allegiance through thanksgiving. But not only does he do it by way of thanksgiving, but he also does it through prayers of supplication. The Bible says that his enemies find him openly praying and asking God for help. In the face of Darius's threats, Daniel seeks God's help. He seeks God's present availability. He seeks who God is and what God can do. He asserts that God is greater than Darius, and he seeks God presently. You see, friends, through supplication, we express our allegiance to God as the source of our help. We declare our trust in God's current availability. It is the belief that the God who was available is still available. The God who was present is still present. The God who heard you is the God who yet hears you. As thanksgiving thanks God for having met your needs, supplication trusts God for what you currently need. Supplication says, God, while I thanked you for back then, I'm telling you I need you right now. And I believe you now. I trust you now. I hope in you now. I depend on you now. I rely upon you now. That was the boldness that our forebears had when they would lift up their prayer chant, and they would lift it up every Sunday. You might have gotten tired of it if you grew up in a country church or you're older than 45. When they would lift, my God, they would lift this chant every time they were in service. Father, I stretch my hands to thee. No other help I know. If thou withdraw thyself from me, where shall I go? I can't go anywhere but you. I can't count on anybody but you. I don't need anybody but you, because I trust you to be who you are, and I'm stretching my hand to you. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. They did it every Sunday because every Sunday they recognize I need you for this week. I need you for Sunday through Saturday. So Father, I lift my hands. And it is here that we see something else about bold prayer. Bold prayer declares the specificity of trust. Daniel calls on the Lord for help. And in that word, he calls on the Lord for favor and mercy. Lord, have mercy. He's calling on God for favor and mercy. He's calling on God for strength to face what is coming. He is calling on God for strength needed to experience God's deliverance. It is for present help. It is for help in the right now. It is for God to be greater than Darius right now. It is for God to be stronger than the lions that he'll face on tomorrow. Boldness in prayer is demonstrated by the specificity of your trust. In the face of the specificity of your situation, it is praying with specificity to God for what is needed. When you are facing a specific situation, you've got to get specific with God. If somebody comes up to you and they've got money to give you, and they ask you, what is your debt? And if all that you say is, well, I just need a little money, that ain't gonna help you. If your debt is $100,000.50, you need to be able to tell them, this is what I need, $100,000.50. You got to be specific. And it's that type of boldness that you got to have when you go to God. In the face of danger, you got to pray for protection. In the face of illness, you got to pray for healing. In the face of bondage, you got to pray for deliverance. In the midst of lack, you got to pray for supply. You got to believe that God will not give you a stone if you ask him for bread. Boldness in prayer is believing that God knows specifically what you need before you even ask him, but he prompts you to pray to him. He prompts you to be specific so that he can say, I got it already. I have it in my hand. And so do you see Daniel now? Daniel is open. He's bold. He's praying specifically. And as he prays, the enemy comes and the enemy arrests him. Now notice, Daniel does not pray that they not come. He prays that God help him when they come. Lord have mercy. Yeah. Daniel knew that they were coming. And so he just asked God, I'm going to need your help when they come. And so they take him before Darius with the charge of treason. And they tell Darius he still prays to his God 3 times per day. They remind Darius of the penalty for Daniel's actions. And it is then that Darius realizes that he's been used as a pawn in their scheme. He sort of regrets that he made the decree, but it's too late now. And to save face, Darius orders Daniel to be thrown into the lion's den. And as he's throwing Daniel into the lion's den, he says something interesting. He says, may the God whom you serve rescue you. Lord have mercy. Oh, God. And it's right here that you and I discover something else about bold prayer. Bold prayer creates space and opportunity for God to act. Yeah. With Daniel having prayed openly to God for help in the face of Darius's edict against praying to God, the question is raised, now what's God gonna do? What will God do on behalf of Daniel for being faithful to God? What will God do in response to Darius's actions against Daniel and essentially his actions against God? The space now is created in Darius's mind. Is Daniel's God worth Daniel's sacrifice? Can Daniel's God help Daniel where Darius is now helpless? Darius cannot reverse his order And so he essentially says to Daniel, it's on your God now. In fact, just before that stone is placed, again he says, may your God whom you serve so faithfully rescue you. Daniel's boldness in prayer has created space and opportunity for God to act. And I want you to know the same is true for you and for me. When we are unashamed in our gratitude for God, and when we are unashamed in our trust in God through prayer, we create space and opportunity for God to act. God's promise always is, if you call on me, he says, I will answer you. By calling on God, we create space and room for God to act. We create space in the minds of those who are watching us. We create space in their minds. They've heard you talk about God. They've seen you pray. They've witnessed your trust in him. And now they want to know, what is your God going to do on your behalf? And sometimes, friends, God's actions initially will be hidden from the outside world. Look at the text now. The opening to the den is closed by a stone, and the stone has the king's seal as well as all of the nobles' seals on it, guaranteeing that nobody can get in to rescue Daniel. There's a stone over the den, oh my God, with a seal of the king and the seal of the noble, saying nobody can get into the lion's den. Daniel is left to the lions, and the Bible says a full night passes, and the question that hangs in the air all night long is, what will Daniel's God do? What will be the result of Daniel's praying to God? And friends, there are times when that question hangs in the air. What will your God do? What will be the result of your praying? What will be the result of your trusting? What will be the result of your sacrificing? What will be the result of your serving God? But it is through your praying that space and opportunity are created for God to act on your behalf. The Bible says the next day comes, and Darius approaches the den of lions, and he has a question on his mind. Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God whom you so faithfully serve able to rescue you from the lions? As Darius raises that question, the opening to the den is still closed. The seals are still on the stone. The stone is still over the opening. Then nothing has happened on the outside that would give the outside world any indication that anything has changed on the inside. And so the question about God is what God did or did not do on the inside of the den. Could God get to where Daniel was inside? Could God protect Daniel inside? Did God keep him inside? Did God make a way inside? Is Daniel still alive inside? And friends, that's the question. When God doesn't take you out of a situation, the question is, can God keep you in it? Can God provide for you in it? Can God make a way for you in it? Can God give you liberty in it? Can God make you better on the inside? That's the real question. I wonder, am I talking to anybody? Nothing has changed on the outside, but the question is, what has God been doing on the inside? Is there anybody who can say, I'm still in it, but God's been blessing me, God's been keeping me, God's been making a way for me, God's been providing for me? As a matter of fact, God's been putting a smile on my face inside. God's put laughing at my mouth inside. God has given me clarity of vision inside. I'm not out of it. I'm still in it, but God is with me on the inside. Yeah, Lord, have mercy. That's what's going on. That's what's going on. That's what's going on. The king wants to know, is there anything that's happened on the inside? Has your God been able to get to you on the inside? And he's waiting to see, is there a sound that will be made on the inside. Because if there's silence, it means the lions have won. But if there's anything that comes out from the den, Darius knows that God is able. Can I tell you something? You ought to shout if you're able to just make a sound. Lord have mercy. Oh, Lord, I'm trying to get somewhere, but is there anybody who is still in something, and you may not have words, but you got a sound? Oh, Lord, I dare you just to make a sound. I'm in it, but I can make a sound. Yeah, make the devil mad and say, I can make a sound. 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 Make a joyful noise unto the Lord. Oh, you come on, come on, come on, come on. Let's just make the devil mad and say, I got a sound to make. Even if it's just, I got a sound to make. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. There's victory in your sound. There's deliverance in just you being able to say, I got some noise to make in the midst of it. The lions have not made me silent. I'm going to make some noise right where I am. Yeah. With the enemy expecting you to be silent, you got a noise to make. With folk expecting your demise, you got a sound to make. With your enemies wanting you to be done, you got a sound to make. It's hanging in the air. Is your God able? The sound comes from the tomb. Long live the King. My God sent his angel to shut the lions' mouths. Lord have mercy. The reason why I'm breathing is not because the lions lost their appetite. It's just God shut their mouths. It's not that they didn't want to get at me. God just shut their mouths. I wonder, am I talking to anybody in here who knows that there have been some lions? They were hungry. They had the appetite. They wanted to get you, but God just shut their mouths. And Daniel comes out. I think we got it, don't we? Your boldness in prayer creates space and opportunity for God to act. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and there was somebody else whose boldness in prayer created an opportunity. And like Daniel, he was put in a place where a stone was placed and a seal was placed, guaranteeing that he couldn't come out. You know who I'm talking about. It's our Savior. And they thought it was all over. No sound in the tomb. But something happened early Sunday morning. God raised him up with all power in his hand, and he came out declaring, I've got victory, and that Jesus wants to give you victory right now. It is because of that that you can boldly come before him. Lord, have mercy and obtain grace and find mercy and grace to help in time of need. And I believe God is calling for somebody right now to lift your hands boldly, to be bold in prayer and lift up those hands before God in thanksgiving as the one who has supplied your every need, as the one who has fought every battle for you, as the one who has made every way on your behalf. Lift those hands in gratitude to God.